ourselves. Our primitive reptilian brain is there to protect ourselves from danger. And
Do you
that,
think that's a higher priority than, logically, right? I don't know. We're just thinking out loud now. Than that finding that sweet spot across the four, the icky man, as you said. Like if you look at it, does that suggest that for us, that's great if we can get it, but we're more scared of losing our security and our comfort than we are excited about reaching that state? Do you think that's what the offset
I
is?
think at a certain time in our life, we're that way. And I'm going to go back to my lady from Venezuela again, where she came here and worked as a dishwasher at Harvard University. And then she went and got a degree. And then she went on to get other training. And then she went into the tech industry. And she moved into California just as the dot-com crisis was coming on and totally blew up in her face. And then she moved to China in 2019, just before the pandemic hit. And then she moved back to Miami, and then this flood hit and so on. So each time she went through these crises, and at the same time, she came to a higher space in what she went through as well.
So what's the takeaway? Is it that the worst case scenario? Because there are horrible things that happen, obviously.
The answer is, in most of the time, it's all blown out of proportion by our brain, and we really make it more than it is.
So we should be willing to take more risk.
The answer is we should. I think life begins at the edge of our comfort zones. I think we truly, when we take a little step outside of our comfort zone, we get further on with that, and we move forward with that, and we find that that's where we'll do that. People literally do better when they're outside their comfort zones and move forward. And we have to be willing to accept some risk in our life. It's not all going to be a bowl of cherries. It's not always going to be a bed of roses. We have to think that there's going to be some things that we have to move forward from. And there has to be some risk in our life. It's never without risk. No matter what you do, I mean, you take a baby step, you could fall flat on your butt, fine. That's
Are there objectively wrong things though? Because that would be the only counter to that, right? Is if somebody said, if everything is neutral and you take risk, and sure, quote unquote, bad things might happen, but then you roll with it and you go and you get better. Perhaps the only logical fear then is that there's actually objectively wrong things we could do.
Well, I think the objectively wrong things is when you lie, you steal, you cheat and do things to harm others. I think those are objectively wrong things. And I think you as a person know those things that are right and those that are wrong. I think people as intrinsically know when they're hurting people, it's something that's wrong inside themselves. And that's not the right path to take. You should be able to get there without having to do any of that path,
So there's kind of some moral obligations we have as people to stick to, but as long as you're staying within that realm, then any other risk is just part of the deal of life.
One of my golden pearls is non-negotiables, and everybody should write their own list of non-negotiables, those things that you will not do to be successful. Those are things that are something that everybody should do. Like for me, my family is a non-negotiable. They have to be at the top of the list before anything else. And if you think of your family, if you think of those things, those are non-negotiables for me. And so everybody should have their non-negotiable list that are not negotiable under any circumstances.
How do you think so you get the spirit of the show now. I love to probe, just because I think I think when people have wisdom, it's so good to, I think it's hard for people to consume it when it's just fed to them. I think seeing it tested for some people, maybe just me, maybe I'm projecting on everybody, it makes it so much more impactful. So hopefully you see the spirit of where I'm going on a lot of this, but I think I think the non-negotiable is really, really interesting and good advice. How do you make that real for yourself? So with family, for example, you mentioned the podcast, the radio show, the book. I'm sure there's a time commitment that goes to that. How do you think about that in terms of that non-negotiable of saying, well, I could go too far. I could start to sacrifice my family by focusing too much on that. Does that, I guess that nuance we spoke about before. How do you think about that?
Let me tell you, this weekend, Friday night, we went out to our cottage, which is at a beautiful lake in Edmonton. And we were questioning whether we'd go out because it might rain, it might not. Well, Saturday was a gorgeous day, just a beautiful day. Sunday, we decided to come in to go to my grandson's piano concert. Now he is, just young and, plays the wrong notes. But again, it was so important for him to have his grandparents there for his piano recital that we decided to come in, and we just missed a thunderstorm by minutes. I mean, it just poured like crazy on either side of it. And the piano recital was in a garage out on the lawn, so the answer was yes, that was important to be there no matter what. Okay. So it's easy to decide these things when you decide to do it and decide it. As I said, I'd be a very accomplished person. If anybody looks at my CV and my website, they know how accomplished I am. But I tell everybody my greatest accomplishments are my children and my grandchildren, above and beyond anything that I'd ever done. So that in itself, I think, is something that people should look at and decide that's where their onus should be. That's where their people should be. And those are things that people have to know about and decide. And life begins with decisions, tiny little decisions. And they begin with decisions every day. And if you make those decisions properly, it's not that hard of a goal if you make little small decisions the right way along the way. And that is what people, I think when you asked your question, I say, well, you have a choice A and B. Which one do you decide? Use your framework in your brain, your ikigai, to decide that framework. Use your non-negotiable list to decide that framework. It all falls into place fairly easy once you decide what's important with it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It makes me think of a quote by Clayton Christensen. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He was a professor at Harvard Business School. He did a lot of like organizational psychology type work, among other things. I think he came up with the concept of like disruption and innovator's dilemma, different things. But anyways, there's a quote, and I always butcher quotes, but it's something along the lines of it's easier to stick to your principles 100% of the time than 98% of the time, which seems counterintuitive. It would seem harder to hit 100% compliance. But his point was, much in the spirit of what you're saying, if you've decided what matters to you, your non-negotiables, and you just say, I'm sticking to them 100% of the time, life becomes pretty simple in some regards, because you know exactly what the playbook is. When you have to make those decisions, you know exactly how to make them. Whereas if you give yourself that even just 2% out to say, well, sometimes I'll make an exception, now those decisions become that much more complicated. And I